Welcome to the Duckpin Podcast with your host, Brian Griffiths. And now, here's Brian.
One of the things that's been at the forefront of education in Arundel County recently has been discussions about equity and the teaching of equity in our public schools and as it relates to race relations in Anne Arundel County. Not everybody is on the same page with that, however. There are many people who think that what is being taught in Anne Arundel County schools goes a little too far in promoting the so-called equity program. It's something that we've been following at the Duckpin for a while, and joining us today is a attorney, businessman, author, and Duckpin columnist, good friend of mine, Jim Braswell. Jim, thanks for coming on this week's show.
I'm looking forward to this one, Brian.
Well, let's start from the beginning. Let's talk about what kind of really brought into focus the issues with the equity program here in Anne Arundel County. Obviously, as you've written about, you had a very personal firsthand experience with this. So to kind of walk people through what that was like when you saw this process in action.
I was first introduced to this Unity Day concept when my daughter started kindergarten. When I say started, loosely started because of virtual learning back in September. And this concept of Unity Day came up, and I was just asking questions as any dutiful parent would. And the teacher was just super informative about it, and told me that they have 4 days during the year where they try to bring the students together. Of course, I'm suspicious about things like that. The first couple days seemed innocent enough, although I was sort of wary. And it wasn't until, I guess, a month ago, somewhere around then, when justice was the topic for Unity Day. And I needed to know a little bit more about it. Talked to our teacher. I looked at the slides, and that's when I was like, okay, I have to step in as a parent at this point. And that's why I wrote the column. The idea of equity and fairness came up in this lesson where there was these two kids with two different sized pieces of pie, straight from the SPLC. And they were supposed to discuss why this wasn't fair, why one kid had a bigger piece of the pie. And I was like, why are we focusing on outcome? I knew where this was going. Being a student of Williams, being a student of Souls, being a student in the quarter, I knew where this was going. Why are we looking at the outcomes? This is communism. This is the same type of communism that the communists thought that brought about welfare in the 60s. More on that later. Why is my kindergarten learning this concept of equal outcomes? Because whenever you see equal outcomes being pushed, bad things happen. And that's a historical fact.
I mean, that's just basic Marx, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. I mean, that is just basic Marxian philosophy. And that's not even from political side. It's like anybody who has taken a political science class, who has studied, Marx, studied Lenin, knows that is one of the core tenets of Marxist Leninism.
Absolutely. And that's something that has caused the deaths of millions of people worldwide in very inhumane ways.
50 million, I believe, is the number.
It's an absurd amount. So I don't want my daughter being indoctrinated in this philosophy that you have to have equal outcomes. It's kind of weird that here I am. You can label me as a conservative. I'm not even sure I am these days. But you have Bill Maher just this past Friday talking about this in one of the segments, saying like our kids are being indoctrinated. Back in the day, it used to be that teachers were afraid to talk to the parents. Nowadays, parents are deathly afraid to approach teachers about what they're talking about in school.
But you did, and in this instance, you did approach the teacher. You did speak to the principal. So kind of walk through that process. I know that you had extensive conversations with them, and this is before you ever wrote anything for public consumption. You, as you said, the dutiful parent, had those conversations with the school. Tell us what that was like.
Well, I talked to the principal first, and I was concerned about this. Like, why is my daughter being being taught this? Why aren't they learning social skills? Why aren't they focusing on what kindergartners are there for, which is basic math, basic math? Why are we setting aside this time to slowly slide in this thought that all things aren't fair in the world? Like, well, it seems a little bit young to be discussing those seeds. And she was pretty dismissive of me. And she went off on the whole Dr. Zeus tangent, saying, have you ever, ask your daughter what she thinks about seeing people of different color in Dr. Zeus. Why isn't she being represented? And I don't want to get in my family's racial makeup. I'm like, what does it matter? It's Dr. Zeus. And as you know, Dr. Zeus isn't exactly on our side of the aisle when it comes to politics. So, and then I talked to the teachers, much more receptive and understood my concerns, and my hat's off to her. So after that, I was like, you know what? I need to write this article, not for me, but for my kids, for your kids, for our community's kids. And I don't think enough people in the community know exactly what is being taught. And I saw actual slides. The slides that I will touch on this later, the follow-up article that I put on the duck pen, those are actual slides from SPLC. And I saw other slides, which I'm sure you saw as well, of SPLC indoctrination from higher up grades, like high school, and what they're being taught.
Yeah, and we'll get to, like you said, we'll get to the SPLC in a couple of minutes. Now, you first wrote the piece on the duck pin in February, and then it wound up being published in the Capitol, and it lays out all of this. A lot of what you have just said, it lays it out in a lot more greater detail.
Mm-hmm.
What made you? I mean, obviously, it's easy. You've been writing for the duck pin since day one, so it's very easy for you to go ahead and put something on the duck pin. Obviously, what made you want to reach out to the Capitol? I mean, obviously, I've been writing for the Capitol for some time. This is, I think, one of the first times you've had something in the Capitol. What made you reach out to the Capitol and try to get something in the paper about this, and to open up that larger discussion with the county community?
Because it needed to happen. And I know that people in our community, it's a community issue. Teaching is community. It was never meant to be statewide. It was never meant to be national. Teaching has always been about the community. And the Gazette is still it's a red local newspaper. And I wanted to make the parents aware of what is being taught. And I knew it was going to get traction, and I knew exactly what was going to happen. But you know what? I'm tired of the rhetoric, and I'm tired of people being afraid to speak up. So.
Yeah, I think that we've seen a lot of that recently with people who are tired of, both tired of it, but also afraid to go ahead and speak up. And we know that in the near month since you got that piece published in the Capitol, it seems like we're still seeing letters to the editor every so often about that. You said you expected a reaction. Has that reaction, at least the public reaction, what you've seen in the Capitol, what you've seen online, has that been about what you expected?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Why do you think?
Well, from a statistical standpoint, I think most people, regardless of their background, want to get on with their lives. So those people aren't going to take their time and post on a Facebook or write a letter to the editor. It's really the activist class. It's the people that are very very, very zealous. We'll call them zealots, that always make their voices known. And I knew that what I was going to write in this county, in this state, was going to upset some people, especially given the current political climate. It's very hot right now, as you know, as everybody knows, regarding the Black Lives Matter movement. Regarding now, well, it was before anti-Asian hate going on as well. So, I mean, it was fully expected. None of it was surprising.
Are you surprised by how much support you've gotten? I know there have been a couple letters in the a couple letters in the Capitol which have been in support of what you said. And I think what I have seen on social media has been a little more divided, more equally divided than I think even I really expected to. Do you think that there is a silent majority out there, like you said, who are just not, they don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the energy, they just don't have the time to fight this stuff? Do you think that there's more people who out there who are thinking like you than those who are speaking out against? Because you wrote about this on the Duckpin. You wrote a follow-up piece, 2,000 odd some words of follow-up. And you mentioned like some of the reaction that you got. You shared with those some of those with me offline, and those are some pretty that's some pretty hate-filled stuff. I mean, we're talking about people who want to talk about equity and preach tolerance, who are saying some pretty daggum intolerant things all over social media. What say you?
Yeah. Again, I expected it, and based on the reaction, based on the, how should I put this? They're really not thought out remarks and retorting anything I had to say. Nothing at all. It was just your basic run of the mill. Let's put the scarlet letter on this guy. We're gonna call him a racist. Oh, he's a white supremacist as well. Oh, he's from Pasadena. He's a hicker. He's some stupid yokel. It's just that there was nothing of substance there. There was nothing of refuting what I was saying at all. Depressing.
Yeah, it's not all that surprising. My favorite part, and I wrote about this in my piece entitled "The Equity Charade," is where people were first off, they were stereotyping Pasadena. The same people who were complaining about your stereotyping were stereotyping themselves. And then they were throwing that scarlet letter, like you said, of racism out there without knowing your family history, one, but also, also you mentioned your two favorite philosophers of all time, Walter Williams, Thomas Sowell, two of the most brilliant political thinkers of all time, who are also just happen to be African-American.
Just happen to be.
Nobody bothered to Google that and put that together. I think that
exactly.
I think that kind of emphasizes the point that you're making, where people are just either reflexively reacting, or, and I think this may be part of it too, and I'll get your take on this as well. Do you think that there's a certain segment of the people out there who are reacting because they think that's the way they should react, without stopping and actually critically thinking and engaging their brain about whether or not the discussion that you're trying to have is relevant? I mean, I think that people of goodwill can have can disagree on this issue, certainly, but I'm not seeing a lot of that out there. I'm seeing a lot of people who are either very zealous to defend this, or people who haven't necessarily engaged with the topic and feel like it is their social responsibility to defend it based on, frankly, peer pressure. What say you?
What's that saying that Einstein, was it Einstein that says it's better to be thought stupid than to open up your mouth and prove it?
Might have been Lincoln, but it's definitely a statement we've all heard before.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It would be nice to have solid political discourse these days. It really would. It'd be refreshing. To his credit, I did have one gentleman email me, and we had a nice back and forth, and I gave him more of my side. And when he understood my side, he was like, I get it. I disagree with some of the points, but I get it. Did he call me a racist? Did he call me a white supremacist? Not that those words affect me, because I really don't care. But he engaged me like you would hope people engage you, but that just doesn't happen these days. People are so apt to, you know what? I am the church. I am part of the church of the woke. I have to fall lockstep with these people, and just let's all hurl insults. I mean, you saw the Facebook thread.
Yeah, no, it's pretty out there, and unfortunately, you're right. It's kind of very similar to the political discourse these days, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on. I mean, there are people on both sides engaging in just patent stupidity, quite frankly, incapable on either side of the aisle of making a coherent argument, and just, resort immediately, just jump straight to ad hominem. And that's a lot of what we've seen here. Now, one of the things that you have been chronicling, and you did have the receipts for this in the piece, was the Southern Poverty Law Center. And a lot of the content, the teaching tolerance content that is part of this curriculum for this Unity Day, at least the day that you mentioned here, comes from the Southern Poverty Law Center, which has its own checkered history of, to say the least,
of sexual harassment.
Sexual harassment, racism, not paying their employees a living wage, that sort of thing.
Go figure, right?
Yeah. So, one of the more interesting things about that, though, is the fact that we have this organization with such a checkered past who is participating, and basically their content is being regurgitated for consumption by the county schools. Now, you had a very interesting conversation with Bob Mosier, the spokesman for the Anne Arundel County Public Schools, about this very issue. Mr. Mosier said that they have not adopted the SPLC curriculum, even though they are using it, and their logo and branding are on the slides that are being shared in class.
Yeah. He said they're using it as a guide, I think so. Yeah, it was a guide. They're just, and I called him out. Like, I saw the slides. They're being used in the class. Well, it's just a guide. It's just a guide, and it's not that I want, like, I would say the same thing if there was a right wing corrupt think tank. I don't want that in my schools either. I don't want any of that. I don't want any indoctrination at all. Reading math, there's a reason why we're being lapsed in other countries. We're focusing on the woke. We're not focusing on STEM and important subjects. So it bothers me that we're using anything regarding the SPLC. I mean, anything at all. First off, they are a hate-filled group. They make their money off of hate. They made their most money when Donald Trump was the president of the United States of America. And the individuals that they employ are full of hate too. And I just picked out two random. I didn't go through a whole list of them. I picked out Hassan Jeffries, who is the brother of Hakeem Jeffries, congressman from Brooklyn, who's a Democrat. And I went through his Twitter. I went through his work. It is very, very, very divisive. It is extremely hate-filled as well. Why do I want, and you can look at the piece on the duck pin for, I said I have receipts. Why do I want someone like him involved in any way with my daughter's education, even if it's just a guide? He should not have any influence over her at all. And if you look at he's part of the Teaching Hard History, and I'm sure we'll get into this in a little bit, the Teaching Hard History curriculum, where there's even a taste of anti-capitalism in there as well.
Well, I mean, when you start talking about equity, you're eventually going to wind up with some sort of anti-capitalist thread. Yes. We mentioned the Marxist-Leninist aspect of this earlier, and capitalism encourages competition, and capitalism, even though we don't not to sound like a socialist, but we've never had true capitalism in this country. The idea of capitalism is that there is competition and there are unequal outcomes because there is a winner and there is a loser, and the market decides that, and not the government either deciding winners or losers. I know people from Maryland might be confused by that concept. But, everybody, the Lake Wobegon effect where everybody's above average.
Yeah, even Hayek even said that even the rule of law produces unequal economic consequences, something along the lines of that.
Yeah.
It is what it is. It's life.
That's just, human nature is unequal unequal and produces unequal outcomes. Even their beloved communism produces unequal outcomes. Just ask people who've had to live under communism.
They're called elites.
Let's go back to that conversation with Bob Mosier, though. did you get a sense from him that there are other parents expressing concern with this curriculum, or is he kind of trying to pigeonhole you as like one voice in a crowd of people who otherwise aren't bothered by it?
I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't know. That would be good to know. That would be good to know. Maybe I'm the first to speak up, as you know, going back to Bill Maher saying that parents are afraid, but I don't want to be the only one. I don't want to be, you know, the one spearheading this. I want other parents to speak up, because it's their kids as well. You know, it's not just, you know, my kids, it's your kids, it's their kids, it's our community. And that's what's at stake. And I think that's one of the larger concerns that I have with the SPLC's involvement. Now, I've been doing a lot of work with this. I have throughout the years. As you know, I'm a big activist regarding human trafficking, which doesn't seem to be a concern of the SPLC at all. It's never brought up in any of their lessons. Go figure. I wrote about in the Gazette, actually. So I've been exposed to this. I've been exposed a lot to the different, like, the way that the races have interacted with each other, not just in America, but in almost every continent. I think people would be really enlightened to read the history of slavery. Who wrote that book, The History of Slavery? It's enlightening. It's like there has been slavery everywhere. There's been chattel slavery everywhere, except when there is a big enough population to have enough jobs. And in those situations, you have something called debt slavery. It's a big thing in India right now. So
yeah, and people forget, as you mentioned, that, you know, human trafficking is often, you know, in modern times happening today on this earth, still exists. I mean, there is
in America.
Yeah,
in America, it's $150 billion a year industry, and it's not going away. That's the biggest issue, you know, we have with the cartels. I mean, drugs still one of their main imports into this country, but you know what's increasing exponentially? Human trafficking. I mean, it's literally sex slaves, house slaves. They're here in America. But again, that's never brought up. That's never, those girls, those females, those young girls that are brought up from the triangle, nobody cares about them. They want to talk about past grievances. Anyway, back to my earlier point about, you know, why I'm afraid of what's going on with the elementary schools, is that I think John McWhorter wrote about this, losing the race, and his follow-up, Still Losing the Race. This was back in the early 2000s, about how the communists, and it sounds so like conspiracy theory by saying the communists, the ultra left wing part of the Democrats, you can say, they were losing their grip on the Black community. They really were. It was something like in the Al Gore election, there was an exit poll, and like 68% of them said, of Blacks, said they don't want any race preferential, nothing like that. And 90%, another study said something along the lines of 90% said they do not want a Black student to get into a university if they are less qualified than a white student. So right there, you saw cracks in the foundation. Those are just two studies. I have other studies as well. And McWhorter goes into this. And to me, it seems that, you know what, we're losing this generation. Where can we gain back our power? Because again, to organizations like the SPLC, it's about making money. It really is about making money. Look at those articles I posted in the Duck Pin. How do we keep our grip? Let's get to the young ones. Let's get to the really young ones, indoctrinate them, make them feel, you know what, guilty because they have a certain color of skin, or in the adverse, you can't do it by themselves, which to me is just damning. I have a huge issue with this, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more.
Yeah, let's talk. You mentioned earlier the hard history and the and obviously that ties in also into the 1619 project, which got a lot of attention in the last year as well, especially considering the 1619 project seems a little bit has been pretty well discredited at this point as far as its historical nature. But yeah, I just put it politely.
Mother Goose.
Yeah, you know, it's I mean,
fairy tale.
You know, and this all ties together though, because, you know, we're talking about, you know, it's one thing to teach this equity curriculum, which is not at all tied to it's not tied to the school curriculum. It's just thrown in there for this kind of extra thing when we could be talking about, like you said, science, tech, engineering, math, English literature, civics, which you know how my thoughts about desperate need for civics education in this country. Mm-hmm. But when we start talking about hard history and we start talking about 1619, now you're really starting to change the curriculum and change what is being taught. And now look, I am not naive. I understand that there are certain things in American history which have been glossed over, even from, the high level history classes that I have taken. And that there are certain things that people don't want to talk about in polite company. But at the same time, a massive reinterpretation of what actually happened is not a benefit to society either, especially when it grossly misinterprets the foundation of our country, for example. The foundation of our country not going back to 1619, but really going back to 1607, if you really want to make a case going back to 1492. I guess my question here, if you start combining all of these elements, where do we go from here? You have a situation now where you've got all of these other elements, the equity and SPLC curriculum, this alternative histories, if you will. You've written this piece, which has provoked a lot of outrage from some, support from others. What do you think is the next step? Where do you think this ultimately ends? Do you think we end up with a situation where we can stop this and kind of restore balance to the curriculum? Or are we already past the point of no return?
Well, I'm from NC State, so never give up is a big thing with me. Jim Valvano, if you're familiar with NC State basketball, I don't think you give up. I think that if you care about your neighbors, if you care about your kids, you care about your community, not even the community that look like you, you don't give up. You become active in the school and make them change this curriculum. Get this out of the system. It's poison. It's creating hate. It's going to create, regardless of what some snowflakes are going to say, ultimately it serves no purpose. I don't understand why you're teaching, okay, and there's a big emphasis on like Europeans, like, oh, these European people are bad. If you want to go that route, you can, again, teach the entire history of slavery. And it's, as Walter Williams writes in the one piece that I quoted in my original piece, we've all been really crummy with each other. What's the point of continuing that divisive talk? Why can't we move forward? Like everybody's like, if you bring this up and say, well, in America, there's also redlining. That was back in the 60s. Why are we still looking back that way? Why don't we look at the issues that are happening now? Look at modern. What can we do to improve every child? Well, my thought is, first you tell them you can do it regardless. You say you never give up. Little engine that could. You just never give up. You keep trying your hardest. Every kid has the tools. You also have to emphasize the family, Brian. I mean, if you want to be successful, having a solid family foundation is so damn important. If you look at poverty statistics in this country, if you look at unemployment statistics in this country, there is a direct correlation, regardless of the person's race, with a low unemployment.
Yeah, I think people forget that the people, when they think about they hear people start talking about the importance of the family unit, they forget, the high single parent rate in Appalachia, for example. I mean, Appalachia, people don't realize that there's a lot of similarities between urban areas and Appalachia, more so than anybody cares to admit. But, when you start talking about the family unit, that is a basic function. It's worked, to kind of quote, paraphrase Tony Stark, it's worked for us for so long and it's worked out pretty good so far. So that's the way we've always done it. And it's just very, very, very important, as you say.
No, I agree. It's you have to emphasize that, and I I would just hate to see that we regurgitate 1966 again. They want to talk about reparations. I mean, does anybody know about the Community Reinvestment Act? Does anybody know what actual history of welfare is in 1966? Like, does anybody does anybody know who like Frances Fox Piven is and why she lobbied hard, and other these intellectuals lobbied so hard to make welfare much easier to get and eliminating the work requirement, and what that did to the Black families in the inner cities? Does anybody ever care about that and see the ramifications of that? If you look at nuclear households back before that time, between all the races, they were really similar. They were very, very similar. And if you look at the poverty rate of the Blacks in this country, they started like at 85% in the 30s, and in less than a decade, it went to 40%. And that de-escalation was skyrocketing until the 60s, when it was stifled because of, guess what? Welfare.
And
so we need to put,
and very similar to, like I said, with the numbers in Appalachia and some other rural communities. And look, you want to talk about, people talking about the government coming in to fix these things.
Yeah.
and I always say that the best argument against government anything, government housing, government healthcare, government anything, is to take us to drive through a Native American, an Indian reservation in the West. And I've driven through many of them. And they're some of the saddest, most desperate, most hopeless places, because folks have become so dependent on government assistance. And, there's no impetus. The government, the feds do not want to develop things. The states don't want to help them develop things. It's just becomes a dependence issue. And it really is an issue with the, people want to talk about the dignity of people. And
that's what it's about.
When you start taking away somebody's dignity by making them dependent on somebody else, in this instance, government, that creates a whole other cycle of issues that just spiraled for generations. Well,
I don't mean to be, I don't mean to be, and I want to say this.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't mean to be picking on the Black community. It might seem that I am, but I see the race hustlers using that community, and that's why I highlight that community. You're dead on in regards to Appalachia. I mean, if anybody, that segment of this country is extremely ignored. It's so ignored. And you want to talk about extreme poverty? You want to talk about people don't have indoor plumbing, who don't have your basic healthcare needs. There's a whole I was reading this a while ago. There's a whole industry of disability out in the mountains as well. You have a bunch of disability lawyers out there and taking advantage of the people in Appalachia because of the huge drug addiction they have with pills.
Yeah, pills, meth, and everything else that they cook.
Yeah, man. Out. But they're just forgotten about as well. But again, I don't mean it may seem I'm not picking on the Black community. I'm just highlighting what these big government programs has done to that community.
And look, the equity issue, when you start making it an issue regarding, that makes it a socialist issue, that hurts everybody equally. I mean, we know that everybody, regardless of race, color, or creed, gets screwed by socialism and gets screwed by communism.
Absolutely. And it's those with the savior complexes that come in there and they think they know better than everybody else.
Yeah.
Get them out of here.
When everybody just really wants to be left alone.
Yeah. Everybody can do it. It doesn't matter. Everybody has the tools. If they work hard, if they study, you have the tools to succeed.
Amen to that. If folks want to reach out to you, want to get in contact with you, want to talk more about this issue, how can they do that?
They can email me. Sorry. They can email me. jbraz77@gmail.com is fine.
Well, Jim Braswell, always good to talk to you, buddy. I'm
Always.
sure this will generate more conversation amongst the people in the county, and hopefully we can have that in a civil conversation and not the Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome stuff that we've seen already.
Brian, it's easy to reach out and talk to me. It is. It's very easy. I consider myself pretty easy to talk to.
Jim,
yeah.
Jim Braswell, writer for the Duckpin, attorney, businessman, author. Thanks for coming on this week, buddy.
Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
This has been the Duckpin Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and download